To the Pastoral Search Committee, that's you. It is my understanding that you have a vacancy in your pulpit, which you do. And I would like to apply for the position. I can't say that I preach too well. In fact, I tend to stutter when I speak. I do have a lot of different experiences I could share with you since I'm over 75 years old. I've only just recently had an encounter with God. And despite my initial resistance to the idea, I heard a voice in my head which told me personally that I was to do ministry for you. One never knows when God might appear right before your very eyes. As far as people skills go, I do tend to lose my temper every once in a while, especially when things don't get done the way I want them to get done. And I can get violent if those things aren't done in a timely manner. Once I even killed somebody. But since I know you are a gracious people, I know you will believe me when I say that that's all behind me now. I intend on showing up there in a few weeks into your pulpit and lead you into a brighter future. Although I was reluctant at first to work with you, I still feel called to be with you nonetheless. So let's say Larry over here is the leader of the leader of the committee, Baptist Search Committee. And Larry asks you, what do you think about this candidate? So let me ask you, what do you think about this candidate? Would you want him as your pastor?
He's past retirement age.
He's too old. What else?
He has a temper.
He's got a nasty temper, especially when things don't go his way.
That's in his past.
But that's in his past, Larry said. He's a murderer.
That's in his past.
That's in his past. So Jane, a member of the search committee as well, says, who is this guy? You see where I'm going? Moses. It's Moses. Moses stuttered. Moses once killed an Egyptian, defending the life of a Hebrew in Egypt. Moses ran away from his problems. Moses had a wicked temper. Remember him coming down the mountain, seeing his people having a party, and he smashed the Ten Commandments? Moses did not fit the bill as far as what we would consider a ministerial candidate, did he? He pretty much bit the big one. He really didn't have what we would consider all of the attributes that we would want as a leader of God's people. But as Larry has said, that was in the past. The call story that you heard this morning, Moses' call, took care of all of those issues. At the very beginning, might I remind you of how it started? Moses was doing his thing that he did day in, day out. He was working, secular job, tending the fields and the flocks of his father-in-law Jethro. He was at work when God called him. He was at work. So what do we take from that? We take from that God, the great I am, calls us in the most mundane, everyday things of life to work for him. We might not get a burning bush. We just might get a feeling. In our prayer time, maybe God says something, a word comes into our mind. A ministry will come into our mind. Maybe a phone call will come over but it'll happen in the most mundane of ways. Moses was sitting in a field, for goodness sakes, when he first heard the call. So when the great I Am wants to get your attention, he'll do it in your everyday life. It rarely comes in a church service. Are you sitting down, folks? It rarely comes on a mountaintop, holy, high, holy experience. It comes in your everyday work. When I received my call to ministry, I was teaching. Overworked, frustrated in some ways, tired. I had been off for 2 weeks for a surgery that I had had. And the great I Am got my attention. And the everyday things of life. Wasn't in a church setting. I was just simply sitting there trying to heal, keep my mouth shut, which was extremely hard to do. Extremely hard to do. But it was an everyday thing. So when I Am calls, and he will, it'll be in your everyday life. It might not be in a bush form. But occasionally, for the more stubborn folks, they need a bush. When I Am calls, and he will, it might mean for you that you might be tempted to give him an excuse. I stutter. I don't. Moses does. You might tempt to give him the excuse that I'm too young, or I'm too old, or I'm not retired yet, or I'm retired, or I'm retired. God's word is full of people who, when they were called by the great I Am, gave excuses. Moses was no exception. I think actually Moses was the king of excuses. I stutter. So what does God do? Burns. I mean, literally. He, along with Isaiah, they get a whole new mouth. A whole new mouth. He also gets someone to help him in his brother Aaron. You know, at this time, when Moses was called, you have to understand, folks, that there were 600,000 fighting men of Israel. That's 600,000 men who were of fighting age. Now add with that women and children and elderly, you're talking 2.5 million Hebrews. God says, I want you to go to that church over there, whose membership is 2.5 million. Now are you in the perspective with me? I want you to go to that church over there with 2.5 million people, and I want you to lead them out of a country where they've been in bondage for hundreds of years. Okay? And Moses did what I would have done. I can't do that. I don't know how to do that. I'm just one person. These are 2.5 million. They're not going to listen to me. And what does God do? Well, I'll give you a helper. Don't worry. I'll give you a couple people who you'll get on your leadership team, and they will help you lead these people out of Egypt. I will give you signs to help them understand who you are. And most importantly, I will be with you. when the great I Am is on your side, ain't nobody gonna take you down. So when I Am calls you, and you try to give him an excuse, I can't do that ministry anymore, or I can't reach outside the box, or I have this, I have that, God will get to you. He'll take care of all of those issues that you think you have, and he will equip you for things that would blow your mind. Because he's calling you into salvation work, redemptive work for the world. And so he wants it to happen. It will happen. I also enjoy the story of Moses and his calling, because it reminds me of how so very often that God has been right there all the time. We know that Moses will eventually, obviously, say yes. That he will lead these 2.5 million people out of bondage. That he will help the Israelites accept salvation, although temporarily, because of God's redeeming grace that worked through him. Why talk about Moses today? Because I think you're called. I think individually you're called to do things. Some of you are living those calls out, and some of you still haven't heard or haven't seen a burning bush. Or some of you are thinking that maybe that call's going to come in some way, when in fact it's probably right before you right now. Or maybe it's been in the back of your mind all along. And you've thought, well, it had to be something spectacular. No. Maybe God's calling you to send cards out to the Fox family. Or to bring a meal this week when the church serves the dinner. It doesn't have to be a huge thing. It doesn't have to be a huge thing. One of the greatest things I think about the Moses story for me is actually the title, is the name that God gives Moses. When Moses says, when he puts up another wall and says, they're not going to listen to me. Who am I going to tell them spoke? Who am I going to tell them gave me the authority to preach for you? I don't see a bishop here. Who gave me the authority? And he said, tell them I am who I am. Tell them that I am commissioned you for ministry. Why do I love that? Because it's present tense. That's why I like it. It's not I was. God doesn't say, tell them I was sent you. God doesn't tell them I will be. God says, I am. I'm a living God. I am in your midst, and I got your back, and sometimes I've got my foot up your behind. I am who I am. That's what gets my juices flowing on a Sunday morning, and a Saturday evening, and a Friday during community dinner. That's what gets my juices flowing on Bible study on Wednesday night. That's what gets my juices flowing when I'm down at Albright Life or wherever, because I am calls me. And I know that wherever I am will be right with me. So for those of you who are in that limbo, for those of you who have made excuses, for those of you who have been working, but maybe not working in the area that you're supposed to be, I'm going to pray for you that you hear, I am calling.